you looked at Europe and North America, what are we seeing? We're seeing nations who are afraid of basically becoming partners in a new post-colonial world where they had access to all the resources, the growth, etc. So they want to maintain that economic hegemony, if I can use that word. So if you take the United States, the current administration wants to put tariffs, etc., because they want themselves to grow more. So what do you do to change that? Because you say we have to change. Who is going to change that? It is, would you agree with me that what we're talking about is changing the political economy? What hope in hell is there of that happening in the next 30 years?
I don't think we can convince the Trump administration to go post-growth.
Trump administration is only going to be around for another 4 years. So, after that, what's happening?
Yeah, hopefully. The thing is, listen, growth will halt one way or another. I say this a lot because I get this question a lot, and I'm like, it seems you're operating on the assumption that, well, we can do business as usual, or we can change our economy. And it's like, no, that's not the choice. Business as usual is absolutely non-viable. It will stop way or another. Our choice is how we stop it. If it's design or disaster. The well-being economy is the design. The disaster seems to be where we're heading right now. So one way or another, the system will change.
I agree with you. Business as usual has to change. But the political system is very much hinged toward the neoliberal idea that it is business as usual will not change. And to your point, business as usual will end in some sort of catastrophe and collapse. But that is not the outcome we want. We want to prevent that collapse. So the question is, how does that happen when we see in the most advanced economies a great reluctance to do anything that shifts? Because ultimately, you need a political system that can enforce, and this is the point I was trying to come to, how would that manifest itself, if not in the United States, in Europe?
I think, to be perfectly honest with you, and I take no pleasure in saying this, but I do think, especially since the election of Donald Trump, I think we are looking at the system not being able, by and large, to be changed from within. And I think it will break. And to some extent, I don't say this with any pleasure. I think the current Trump administration is going to break the current system faster. And really, what the job that I see for myself is not necessarily preventing collapse anymore. I was more optimistic when I read my book, but since I wrote my book just 4 years ago, we've gone in the opposite direction, if anything. And so I think right now what I'm doing is trying to make the collapse as just as possible and sowing seeds for how we rebuild. Once that has happened, again, this is not the end of humankind at all. And there will be a lot of natural destruction and human suffering. And I think the hardest thing about that will be that it was unnecessary. It didn't have to be like this. We could have designed our economy better and differently, and we didn't.
The collapse also manifests in the way political systems are essentially evolving. Or is it simply a different for wealthier societies? It's actually just a reduction in convenience, and I call indulgence. Whereas for others, a collapse would mean from not having access to safe water regularly to actually not having access at all. What does collapse actually look like? Can you give a couple of examples from different parts of the world based on your experience or your modeling?
I think it's an excellent question. You're absolutely right. And that's why when I say collapse, I immediately follow it. It doesn't mean the end of civilization because it's
Yes,
not
that's right.
ashes from fallen from the sky and we're all walking around like
That's right.
zombies. That's exactly right. Collapse is simply, technically, a steep decline from a previous peak. And so how that will play out, it will play out differently over time across the globe. I do think we are already in collapse. If you look at the US, I think it's very clearly these political movements also illustrate that. And if you're asking about what I done some work, well, we have done some work in the Earth for All Commission, which is part of the Club of Rome, which made a new model of the world to analyze that. And one of the original Limits to Growth authors, Jürgen Renders, was part of that as well. And he said, well, really what you'll see is that the societal collapse will come before the environmental one. And I think that's what you're seeing, the disconnection. I think the US is a prime example of that because inequality is relatively high in the US. You see it setting in faster. And I think also how it will play out might be very different from more egalitarian countries because how it will play out will also depend on these kind of factors. So if you have less inequality, I think you may be able to take the route that you described, Chandran, of okay, we're all just slowly realizing that we just all have to do it last man, and you do it like that. I think in other parts of the world, because of the high inequality, you will get proper class warfare, for example.